Welcome back. Thanks for coming. I guess we'll get right into it unless... Oh, wait a minute. I do have one thing. David mentioned business cards Sunday evening for the upcoming, I don't know, what do we call it? Q&A series that he's talking about. You know, the ask ask a person, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? They have business cards for them now, basically. It has our website and where to email the questions, the date, and an invitation to come, and it has our address on the back. So we have a ton of these, a ton. So make sure to take some and hand them out, or like post them on little cork boards in restaurants or whatever it may be.
Leave it on your table with your tip.
Exactly, leave it when you leave a tip at a restaurant. There's a box up here if you all want some after class. There's also 2 large stacks sitting in the foyer, so there's plenty to go around. Make sure to take some. Got questions for next week. Go ahead and pass those out while we get going, I guess. You can just take one and pass it around. All right, so kind of getting into a rhythm, I think. So let's go ahead and talk about last week a little bit. If it will cooperate. Martin, you say that it'll... you said I don't know how to use it. I keep trying and it changes every day. I tested it. I walked over, I pressed down, and it changed.
Do a better job, Martin.
Do I have to click on the other screen, or what? Go ahead and set me up real quick. Because I'm tired of having this problem every week. It's only the 3rd week.
Yep. You say dragon with a fireball.
Oh, another announcement, housekeeping. This is my little suggestion box. I stole it from, actually Allison stole it from somewhere. If you have feedback and you want to leave it anonymously, just put it in here and I'll read it. Take it to heart or throw it away.
Yeah.
Whichever's more appropriate.
Take it tomorrow to the garbage.
I have one suggestion right now.
Yes.
Will you check the air?
Yeah, I just kicked it down to 64 degrees. It is not working right. Y'all a little warm?
I kicked it down to 68.
I cut it down to 64 while ago.
Are the vents open? Is that?
It feels like it's the heat zone.
Try that. Okay. That looks pretty nice. So arrow. Okay. Okay. Cool. I'm gonna move the mouse out of the way and let the keyboard do the work. Okay. So now that we're ready to go, and hopefully we won't have this problem again. First question from last week's handout. Read Deuteronomy 30:15 through 19. Rewrite Moses' statement as a logical argument. This is just kind of some practice. This one really isn't as big a deal as most questions, but I just wanted to give you guys maybe some practice in thinking about what we mentioned last week. So did anybody try this one? Nobody? I'm not going to read it. Could someone read the verse first, maybe?
See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments, that you may live and multiply. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away, so that you do not hear and are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to live in and possess. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that you and your descendants may live.
Okay, so notice the therefore. That's your cue. That's his conclusion. That's where he was going. So then you can look back from that verse and see what was he talking about? What points did he make? And the main idea of this short paragraph is life and death, correct? So he's saying, I have presented before you 2 choices. So essentially, the statement here, or at least a statement you can pull out of it, and you can word it probably several different ways, but the main idea is, I have given before you to obey God or to disobey God. That would be your first premise. And we know that's true because that's what he did. He's repeating himself at this point. The second premise is, if you don't choose God, you will perish. And he's given that in his speech. So the therefore is, therefore choose life. So you have a choice of life or death. Of course, if you choose death, you will perish. Therefore choose life. That's your premise, and your conclusion. Does that make sense? Kind of follow along? Maybe? Okay. Let's move on. Matthew 11:19. Would someone read that for me, please?
The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children.
Okay. So what logical fallacy is Jesus referring to in this verse from last week that we talked about?
I could read your name's right too.
Oh. Okay.
Let's teach and
Yeah, an ad hominem argument. So what are the Pharisees, or the people he's talking about at this point, what are they saying about it?
they're attacking his character rather than listening to his message.
Yeah, they're attacking his character. They're attacking him as a person. They're not addressing what he's saying. They're not coming back at Jesus with Bible verses. They're not coming back at him with the Old Testament. They're not even attacking the structure of what he's saying. All they're saying is, he does works through the prince of demons, or he spends time with sinners, or he must be drunk. You notice the common theme here, and you see this throughout the New Testament in all the Gospels. When Jesus comes up and talks to the Pharisees, or the Pharisees come up and talk to him, they might start with a biblical question, but once he gets them in a point where they can no longer answer, they start attacking him instead of what he said. They're backed into a corner logically. They can't go any further with what they have, so they back up and punt, and they just try to attack his character instead to try to win the people around him in an emotional sense. All right, any questions on this one? All right. Third question. Someone read Matthew 7:3, please. And if you guys can see where I'm going with this, if anyone wants to pick up the next couple of verses. Someone read Matthew 7:3.
And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? That's not right.
No, that's right.
That's
Oh,
fine.
okay.
That's right. You good?
I was thinking that was a chapter.
Okay. Mark 4:21, please.
Also, he said to them, is a lamp brought to be put under a basket or under a bed? Is it not to be set on a lampstand?
All right. And Luke 5:23, someone.
Whether it is easier to say thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say rise up and walk. Is that right?
Let me see.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So mine says, which is easier to say, your sins have been forgiven, or to get up and walk? So what's the common thread going through these verses?
That's a good question.
Jesus is asking questions. Now, if you read the gospel for just a little moment of time, you notice people come up and ask Jesus things all the time. But how does he respond?
A lot of times with a question.
A lot of times he poses a question back. Now, why does he do that?
To get them to think about the reasons they're asking.
Yeah, a lot of times, if you read in the scripture, if someone comes to Jesus with a question, they're not actually looking for the answer to the question. There's an underlying motive there. There's an underlying question, a question behind the question. And so what Jesus does is he doesn't give them an answer they're looking for. He makes them think instead. So he teaches by asking questions, by making people think and come to their own conclusions based on what they've already told him. So, like we talked about last week, when you're talking to people, good things to keep in mind. Ask questions. Ask them, why do you believe this? Or what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And get them to defend what they're saying. And I think if you look in the Gospels, you'll see that Christ took a very similar approach a lot of the time. He posed questions to people instead of just giving them answers. This whole idea of teach a man to fish, right? So that enables you to stay in control of where the conversation's headed and make it productive. If Jesus is posing all the questions, he turns the tables back on those that are accusing him, and now they have to give answers, and they have to defend what they're saying. All right, any questions on this one? Or any discussion? Okay. So this week, we're going to start into the hot topics, the big issues, the big questions that I imagine most of you guys came here for. For the next several weeks, we're going to be covering basically the questions you think about when someone says the word apologetics. These are generally the big questions that pop up from time to time. So what I'm going to try to do is give a good overview of the issue. And I'm going to try to do it enough justice in a 1 hour or a 45-minute period to give an introduction as to what the issue is, what are some major points behind it, why does it matter, and we might get into some objections to this, but it really just kind of depends on the time we have. For those of you who weren't here the first week, I do want to make sure and plug, if you have specific interest in any of these topics, just let me know, and I'm fully willing to dedicate an entire quarter or whatever length of class to a topic specifically. I don't mind going into more depth, it's just that this class is not organized to do that. But I have no problem spending an entire quarter talking about these arguments or talking about evolution or whatever it may be. I'm willing to do that. You just let me know. I'd love to, actually. But tonight we're talking about the existence of God. I am. Quoted in, or not quoted, but spoken in what book? Matthew, true. Where does it originate? Exodus?
Very beginning, yeah.
Moses.
Yeah, God's talking to Moses through the burning bush. I am sent you. Jesus later calls back to this moment when he's saying, what? Before Abraham was, I am. So this is a very pertinent, very relevant, and very important question to address. The scope of this question, the scope of this issue is huge. Let's see if I got everything up there. Yeah. God's existence is a fundamental truth. What does fundamental mean?
Basic. Foundational.
Yeah. Basic, foundational. You build other things upon your fundamentals. Whether it's playing a musical instrument, whether it's learning English or math, whatever it is, if you're going to develop anything, it has to be built on the fundamentals, because the fundamentals are where you start. The existence of God is one of those fundamental truths. Now, why is that? Anybody?
Everything else is based on it.
Exactly. Everything is built on the existence of God. If God does not exist, it does not matter what the Bible says. If God does not exist, it does not matter where we came from, and it does not matter where we're going. Who cares if there's no God? The existence of God is what gives purpose. The existence of God is what gives meaning. If that fundamental truth is not there, then you shouldn't be here tonight. You should be off doing whatever you want, because it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how you live your life, or the good things you do, or the bad things you do. Everything is based on this truth. Now, I'm not saying there aren't other fundamental truths, I think there are, but from our perspective tonight, this is the one we're going to focus on now. The existence of God. Would someone read 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, please?
All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works.
All right. So all scripture is given by inspiration of God, yes. Okay, sorry.
I mean, you just got to figure we're with you.
Sorry. Sometimes people think I'm asking for a whole lot more than I am. I'm trying to fix that image. God gives inspiration to Scripture. If God does not exist, Scripture is not expired, it does not matter what's in the Bible. It does not matter what it says. So, and Paul agrees with this. It's given by inspiration of God. If there is no God, there is no inspiration. If there is no inspiration, then this is no more important than this or this.
And then there are those that say, well, just because this says that doesn't mean that it's true.
That's true, and that's, I guess we'll kind of get to that in the next
Later on.
verse. Let's go to John 5:19. If someone would read that, please.
So Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise.
Okay, so how did Jesus do the things he did? Why did Jesus do the things he did? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of God. God was behind all of that. God was involved in all of that. If there is no God, which some people would say, Jesus was just, a nice person who said some nice things, a good philosopher. But that's not true. If you read Jesus' words, if there's no God, if Jesus is not who he claims to be, Jesus is a horrible person because of the things he tells people to do for no hope. If there is no God, if Jesus was not who he claimed to be, then Jesus was a very deceptional liar who's been deceiving people for 2,000 years. And that's what some atheists would say. Now we're going to get on to that subject in a few weeks. We're going to talk about the authenticity of Jesus, both historically and spiritually. We're going to talk about, I think, 3 weeks on different topics on Jesus and who he was and who he is. But just keep in mind, if there is no God, then Jesus was just another televangelist. All right, let's read Ecclesiastes 12:13.
Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all.
All right? If there is no God, then what is man's purpose? He doesn't have one. A Darwinist would tell you that man's purpose is to reproduce and to survive. That's pretty empty and meaningless when you think about it. If there's no God, God gives an actual purpose, not a superficial purpose. We might be able to get into more detail on this later on, but even if you take the evolutionary viewpoint, there's still no purpose. That's just an illusion. If there's nothing from which the purpose comes, then there is no purpose, period. So God's existence, this is just a few examples, but God's existence is behind everything. And the flip side of that is then everything we talk about later on in this class goes back to this. So all apologetics topics, I would say, or most, I don't want to maybe put myself too far out there, but most apologetics topics, at least if not all, in some way point back to God. If you're going to talk about miracles happening, in the Bible claim of miracles, that points to a God who caused those miracles to happen. No God, no miracles. But if there are miracles, then that implies God. Origin of life. We'll talk about this in a few weeks, but life cannot come into existence on its own. If there is no God, there is no life. And on the flip side, if there is life, that pushes us toward God. Creation of the universe. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. The universe cannot create itself. If there's no God, there's no universe. However, since there is a universe, that again points us toward God. And Jesus' claims. If there is no God, then whatever Jesus said is not true. But if what Jesus said is true, then there must be God behind it. Alright, so there are several different approaches to addressing the existence of God. There are several different avenues, like we just kind of talked about. I'm going to go over 3 specific ones tonight to leave with you. And if you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to interrupt me. I need to be better about addressing that, so make sure to hold me accountable. But first one we'll talk about is the cosmological argument. Now, this is why I've got this written on the board. The cosmological argument basically establishes a first cause. And, you guys have heard this one form or another before, I'm sure. Something can't come from nothing. The idea that there must be, at the root of everything else that's happened, a first cause. And the first cause then points to some being or some cause that is above everything that's come behind it. And that is what we claim is God. It establishes God as a personal creator. Second approach, the fine-tuning argument. basically, the fine-tuning argument wants to establish that there's evidence for design in the universe in which we live. From the galaxies and the stars down to the cells in your body, there's evidence for design everywhere. At every scope, in every place you look, there are very complex and unique systems full of information and complexity that scream out for a designer behind them. The idea of these things happening by chance is ridiculous. So the fine-tuning argument seeks to establish God as an intelligent designer. And then there's the moral argument, which, for those of you who don't like science, is a good break from the other two. But the moral argument basically seeks to establish God from the evidence of objective morals. Now, objective morality is the idea that there is something right and something wrong, regardless of your opinion of it, and regardless whether you believe it or not. Some things are always wrong, and some things are always right. So, the way the moral argument goes, then, is since those exist, there must be a God from which they come. Those things can't just occur on their own. They don't occur through evolution. They don't occur just by necessity. They have to come from God. So that argument, the moral argument, seeks to establish God as a moral standard. Now, the interesting thing about this, if you can kind of master or at least memorize these arguments together, they complement each other very well. For example, if you use the cosmological argument by itself, you establish that there must be a God who created the universe and who did it in a personal way. But that doesn't address really who God is. It just says that God must have created. So you can supplement that with the moral argument by saying God must be good because of these reasons. And to establish that he has an interest in us, in our universe, use the fine-tuning argument to show that he spent a lot of, or not, that he invested a lot of thought and design into our lives that we could live. So, and we talked about a couple weeks ago the idea of cumulative case apologetics. This is a good cumulative case because what you can do, if you can establish all of these together, you bring in a very good picture of what we're trying to get at when we talk about God to an unbeliever. So these are, I think, pretty strong arguments by themselves, and they're good when discussing with people, but you can also combine them, and I think they kind of feed off of each other. That also works in the other way around too. If someone feels like they have a pretty good push against one of these arguments and you're kind of running up against a wall, you can hop over to a different one later on and say, okay, what about this? And maybe you can come back to that one later when you've resolved some issues. Okay, so a few things about these arguments. I already kind of talked about it a little bit. These arguments are simple yet deep. They are very simple as far as number of words, as far as lines of text. They are not that long. They're not that hard to remember. If you can memorize a Bible verse, you can probably memorize these arguments. But there's a lot of depth in what they say, and there's a lot of information behind them. I've shown off these two books before, written by the same guy. If you would want these, I would really recommend this one first, because this one is really, really deep. But he goes into a lot of detail on these and other arguments. And there's a lot of stuff you can get into, which is why I mentioned that I'm willing to do additional classes on this kind of stuff, because I'd love to be able to get into the nitty-gritty with you guys on this. There's a lot of objections and a lot of counterpoints. There's a whole lot you can look into. But for someone who might be new to this, or for someone who might be maybe not have all that confidence in it yet, they're still good to pick up and remember and use because they still have impact. They're minimalistic, yet they're all-encompassing. They don't push too far, yet the topics they cover are broad. So the moral argument, all you're doing is you're talking about morality. You're looking at the world around you, you're establishing that yes, people naturally admit that some things are wrong no matter what. That's all that you're doing. You're not going off into science, you're not going off into history, you're sticking with this one base, but it's a very broad argument because it sums up all of morality, for example. And then they're different, and this is the one I mentioned earlier, they're different yet they're complementary. They cover different subjects, but you can use them together and they make each other stronger. So one thing about burden of proof before I present them too much though, keep in mind that atheism, the statement is there is no God. Now, I cannot prove God in the scientific sense. I can't put God in a petri dish and hand it to you and say, hey look, there's God. And I'm not going to try that because I know it's futile. What atheists, though, have a problem with is they believe that their scientific claims prove there is no God. The burden of proof, however, is too much for them to bear. Because even if you can say scientifically or through other means that there's no need for God, you cannot disprove God because you can't test him. So for someone who's taking a scientific or a naturalistic approach, if you can't test God in a petri dish, then you can't prove or disprove the existence of God. So for us, we need to be careful, because if you jump in like they jump in and start making these bold claims that you can't back up, then you're going to find yourself in over your head and you're not going to convince anybody. Well, what we want to say is it's reasonable to believe in God. There are reasons to believe in God. There's evidence to believe in God. I can't show him to you in a petri dish, but I can show from everything around me that there's a very good reason to believe in him. And a lot of times that's all you really need, because we don't want people to just believe what we believe because we believe it. We want people to come to their own conclusions. If someone just believes something because their parents believed it or because their friends believe it, it's not going to stick with them. It's not going to be embedded on their heart. It's just going to be their lifestyle. So if someone doesn't come to their own decisions, then the decisions they make will not be backed up by anything substantial. So this is what we're trying to say. It's reasonable. You do not have to throw away your mind to believe in God. In fact, it's quite the opposite. All right. So, first argument, cosmological argument, comes from the Greek word cosmos. Kappa, omega, sigma, mu, omega, sigma. Cosmos. Now, what does that word, the English version of the word cosmos, C-O-S-M-O-S, what does that mean to you? What do you think about?
Galaxy.
Yeah, galaxy, universe, broad expanse of creation. And that's backed up in Scripture. Someone read Acts 17:24. Why are you laughing at me?
She was proud of me because I
You go to bed.
I taught you that, I'm sure.
We know you got it from your mother.
Yeah, I probably know that.
All right, Acts 17:24.
God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heavens and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands.
Okay, so we already talked about this a little bit. This is Paul speaking to the Greeks, I believe. And he says, God that made the world, that word is cosmos. God that made the cosmos. Now, the interesting thing about cosmos is that, let's see, how did I do this? Okay. A cosmos does not just mean a world or a universe. Cosmos also implies order. It implies harmony. It implies an arrangement. It's not just the universe, it's the arranged or the set up or the harmonious, orderly universe. And of course, order points back towards intelligence, which it points to design. So the formal argument, the formal cosmological argument is as follows. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Simple, intuitive. People would argue it, but it doesn't really hold very well. The universe began to exist. Now, this is a little more in flux these days than it used to be, but at least in recent times, scientists of all backgrounds, whether they believed in God or not, would say this. And so would we. Everyone would say this, because obviously the universe had to begin to exist. So therefore, the universe has a cause. So you see, remember the logical form we talked about last week. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it must have a cause. The universe must have a cause because it began to exist. I'm going to watch the pins because I know I've been moving too fast for people to write stuff down. And I don't want to do that. I feel very bad about that. So this is the formal, logical, three-step argument. This is the part that is easy to remember that I was referring to earlier. It flows into each other because there's similarity in how the sentence is structured. All right, so the first premise, the first statement, says that there must be a cause. A cause is necessary. Something cannot come from nothing. Now, there are a few modern theories that attempt to combat this, and when we have more time, I could go into them all in detail and explain things much better. But the basic idea that they're trying to attack is this idea that something must be able to come from nothing. The problem is, first of all, they're not establishing what nothing actually means. Nothing does not mean a quantum vacuum. Nothing does not mean out in space. Nothing means literally nothing. Can you conceive of that? I can't. And the problem is these folks making these theories can't either, because they're not actually talking about literally nothing. They're talking about a vacuum where there's nothing but air and gravity and electromagnetic field that they aren't really observing going on in a chamber. So if someone begins to trumpet that they've made things come from nothing, do a little homework and see what really is going on. And if that were the case, the other question is, then why doesn't everything come from nothing? Why don't things just randomly pop into existence from nothing? Literally nothing, not what we talked about a minute ago. Why is it only universes? Why can only a universe pop into existence? Why can't a horse pop into existence? Or why can't a pizza pop into existence? That would make my life great and terrible at the same time.
Which one, the horse or the pizza?
Probably both. So the first point, there must be a cause. If something comes into existence, it must have been caused by something. The second point is the universe began. There will be some arguments to this one as well. Generally, the idea then leads to the argument leads to some sort of eternal model of the universe. Whether it's just that the universe has always existed, or whether there's some kind of weird arrangement someone comes up with to allow the universe to be eternal. The problem with that is it doesn't follow from the rest of what we know about physics. There's this thing called entropy in thermodynamics, which it basically explains the disorder in the universe, how energy is constantly being lost. If the universe were eternal, we would have run out of energy a really long time ago, and we would not be here. There's also this problem of infinity. Infinity does not like science. So there's a lot of theories in here that we'll get to in, I guess, next week, but they don't hold up under actual common sense scrutiny. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's our answer for the cosmological argument. God is the first cause. All right, second argument. Also known as intelligent design, the fine-tuning argument is a little more popular in mainstream media about 5 to 10 years ago than it is now, but it's still going strong. Basically, it says that the order of the universe begs for a designer who is intelligent. For the universe to be able to support life in any meaningful way, there has to be design involved. There's just too many factors that have to go just right for it to happen by chance. The mathematics, the probability is just senseless when you look at it. An old analogy that is used is the watchmaker analogy. Let's say you come upon a watch in the middle of the woods. Do you just take it for granted that, hey, there's a watch in the middle of the woods? That watches just show up in woods.
No.
No, what are you going to think?
Leave.
Other than horror movies, what are you going to think?
Somebody put it there.
Somebody dropped it and somebody built it. Someone made it. Someone designed it. If you break open a watch, it's not just a bunch of random stuff. It's a very intricate little system. There's little gears, and there's little arms, and there's little springs, and there's all this going on. Unless it's a digital watch, which is even worse. I can explain to you about that one. There's a lot going on in there. And no one with any common sense is going to take it for granted that it just popped into existence as a watch. So the formal argument is the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity It has to exist just because it has to exist. You can see the problem with that one already. Chance, probability, just random luck, or design. 3 options. If you can come up with the 4th one, then we can address that too. But as far as I can tell, those are the best 3 you got. Second premise then, it's not due to physical necessity and it's not due to chance. So we struck out 2 of the possibilities. So our conclusion is, therefore, it must be due to design.
So if you were using this argument with someone, would you have to go through a process to prove that second premise, or are they just going to accept at face value that those 2 are not the reason it's due to?
It depends on the person, really.
Okay.
But there is proof for it, and there are arguments. There are supporting arguments that I have. And I'll probably be presenting these in more detail next week, too.
So sometimes you could break those premises down into their own logical arguments.
Yes, you could.
Okay.
Yeah.
Entropy kind of disproves both of those anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, entropy is a problem for physicists in general. They really like to ignore it because it basically breaks down all their theories. But beyond that, you know, an atheist's worst enemy and a Christian's best friend when it comes to dealing with these arguments, whether you like it or not, is math. Because if you go back to simple probability, it is astronomical. And I'll show you the numbers next week. It's just crazy how many things have to go right. Perfectly right. You cannot get away from math, and neither can atheists. It'll follow you everywhere.
Yes.
And as far as physical necessity go, that's more of a philosophical and a scientific, theoretical point, not so much in a practical sense. But we can talk about that one a little bit too. So, the alternatives, chance and necessity. Like I said, chance, astronomically impossible. We'll go into more detail soon. And necessity, it's logically inconsistent. If the universe exists because the universe has to exist, it's a circular argument. That's all you can really say to it on the lowest level, is that it's circular. It argues for itself in its own argument. Now, what's funny is that many astronomers actually accept this. Evolutionists don't, because of the Scopes trial and all the media, that happened back then and has happened since about evolution in schools. But if you go into astronomy, you talk about to some astrophysicists who don't have this bias already, they'll tell you something's going on with the order of the universe. They use phrases like someone or something is monkeying with the numbers to set up the universe in a way where it actually works. A lot of physicists have used the phrase almost a miracle. And I notice they say almost. They don't want to admit what it really is, but they'll say that it's so amazing that the universe exists the way it does that it would almost have to be a miracle for it to happen. Someone read Romans 1:20 real quick, please.
For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse.
Okay, why are they out? Well, I guess who are they first? But why are they without excuse?
Because nature can't do this.
Yeah, because nature is showing them that they're without excuse. Nature is pointing towards God. The interesting thing about this is you don't have to be a Christian to see that. God has set it up to where any person can look at the world, and if they look at it honestly, they will see that design is everywhere. That God's handprints are everywhere. There's a reason that there are so many ancient religions just from folks living in the world, because they all came to the same conclusion. There must be something out there that made all of this. All right, last argument, the moral argument, and this one will address probably the last class that we have in November. The existence of objective morality. Now remember, objective as opposed to subjective. Objective is something that's constant. It does not matter what you think or what you want or what you wish. Objective morality means that something is right or wrong no matter what you think about it. So the argument establishes God as the source of this morality. Because elsewhere, where would it come from? Where else would morality come from if not from a moral agent, a moral being from which morality is derived? Morality does not come from evolution. Morality has no basis in evolution. In evolution, it's survival of the fittest. It's establish your species and propagate. There is no morality. And there's no basis for morality to come into being. Like, there's not even any physical possibility of it developing. Otherwise, all morality is just an illusion. And you'll see a lot of inconsistencies when you speak to atheists or agnostics when it comes to this, because, you know, they'll say, well, there are no objective morals, and they'll say, you shouldn't be forcing your beliefs on me. And then you turn back and say, well, aren't you forcing your beliefs on me by saying there are no objective morals? And then they get kind of confused. An atheist will tell you that it is wrong to murder innocent children, unless they're already in the womb. An atheist will tell you that it is wrong to rape, it is wrong to murder, it is wrong to steal. But there's no basis for which that comes from. If there is no God, then it's just an illusion. It's meaningless. Why does it matter? Why do we not do that? The animal kingdom does this all the time. The animal kingdom, animals steal food from each other. Animals kill each other. Animals rape each other, you know, in that sense. If it's not wrong for the animals, then why is it wrong for man? If man was just an animal, it's not wrong. So there has to be an objective morality, and we see it. It's intuitive. You have to be trained not to see it. So the formal argument goes like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties, obligations, you know, not only that something is right, but that you should do it, those don't exist. Now, objective morals and values do exist, so therefore, God exists. Because God is the basis. So if the basis exists, then the one who caused it, or the one who brings it into being, must exist. How are we looking at time? Not too good. Okay. So, I mean, this basically sums up morality as an argument for God in a nutshell. Is that if morality is objective, you have to explain why it's objective. Where does it come from? And where else are you going to get it? Okay, so the moral argument says that objective morals cannot exist without God. It's either right or wrong, regardless of your opinion, and evolution can't explain it. And almost everyone believes in objective morality. I just mentioned that a second ago. I got ahead of myself. Murder, stealing, rape, all sorts of things. Atheists will agree that these are wrong. Some will, at least. Some just want to have an academic argument about how they're neither wrong nor right, but they won't practice that. They might say it, but they will not live it out. This does not follow from evolution. Will someone read Romans 2:14 and 15, please?
For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them.
All right, so what's Paul saying? Gentiles can practice the law how? By nature, by instinct, by their conscience. Just because the Israelites had the law does not mean that Gentiles always sinned and didn't know what was right and wrong. Gentiles still had intuition of God's law by nature. You have to fight against it to not have it. All right. Got questions this week? They're kind of long and kind of wordy. First one basically talks about Albert Einstein. He came up with a theory, but there's a small issue with it. But instead of addressing the issue, he kind of fudged the numbers and allowed for what he already believed. So the question is, why would he do this? Second question addresses the fine-tuning argument. Some people say that there must be several universes, and ours is just the one we happen to live in. There's a couple problems with this, so I want to see your thoughts on maybe what some of these issues are. Third question is about the moral argument. This is an interesting one. I want you to ponder on this one. If you do your homework, I want you to ponder on it. Either something is good because God says it is, or God says something is good because it's good. Now the problem here is either one of these statements separate good from God. It makes them independent. Because either good exists before God and he tells us to do those good things, or God just arbitrarily chooses what's good and tells us to do it. So, how do you answer this objection? How do you answer this issue? All right, thank you guys.